We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 179 for December 18th, 2019. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about what a career in archaeology actually looks like. So get ready to take notes and send angry emails because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Joining me today is Bill in California.
Hello.
And Steven in snowy Calgary.
Hi.
We always say at the beginning of these shows that we want people to write in and comment and, share them out because the whole point of doing this podcast is to generate conversation and to get people to think about stuff, right? So I'm going to read some comments we got from Twitter. I'm not going to mention who that came from because they were a private message to the Archaeology Podcast Network, and the person didn't respond when I asked if I could, put their name out there. So I'm just going to read this. And the person says here, and I don't know if it's a man or a woman, so if I say she or he, that's really just because I slipped up and said that. But I actually don't know who this person is from a gender standpoint or how they identify. So it's purely inconsequential if I say something. Yeah, I'll go with they, but sometimes I screw up. Sometimes my brain just inserts a word and I just, all right, whatever. All right, so what they said was, part of the reason I love the CRM Archaeology Podcast is that most of your hosts, I would say all of our hosts, have spent time working as a field tech at one point in their careers. It greatly concerns me when I hear a project manager state that they can train a green tech to do archaeological monitoring. We need less of a warm body philosophy and better archaeological practice if we want a union. And I think we were mentioning that in the last show. I mean, sometimes warm bodies are needed, but that's more of in a big field tech, we're hiring 40 techs and they can kind of learn on the job sort of thing if they're new. But yeah, we mentioned that aspect about monitoring is that it needs to be somebody who's experienced because they're the only person out there. Anyway, continuing, this person says, on another topic, while I was an undergrad student, I sought out internships in various settings and learned the CRM laws. It was critical for formulating career goals. Before graduate school, seek out advice from project managers about which universities to attend. In Southern California, CRM firms like a particular professor because of his research on the coast and his connections to the CRM industry. Thirdly, if the student is able, study at a different university than the undergraduate program. It's different. It's a bit more challenging, but the person will have more connections and less of a bias. So I think since we kind of talked about the warm body archaeological monitoring thing on the last episode where this came up, let's just bring up the second one. Part of what she says in there, guys, is to go to a graduate program separate from the school where you got your undergrad. And I think I've heard that throughout. I heard that before I went to grad school. I don't know if people are still saying that, but I think personally it's a good idea because you gain a different perspective. So maybe something wise to do. This would be really difficult if you're in high school right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I always recommend going to different schools and trying to get as much different experience as you can. And that carries forward. So when you're working, it goes into, work for a lot of different companies and a lot of different places. And, the broader experience, particularly at the entry level, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that could be tricky, though, like I said, because if you're out of high school and you're thinking about where to go to college and you might think you want to, you have to have a lot of foresight, really, if you want to go into CRM as a career, which I don't know anybody who hasn't been to college yet that's thinking, man, I'd like to go into CRM as a career. Because the reason I'm saying this is I feel like your graduate program, if you're going to go to graduate school, it's going to be more formative on your thinking about the rest of your career than your undergraduate degree. It's going to tighten up what you think and how you think. So the graduate program that you intend is very important. So if you go to an undergrad program that has a great graduate program in archaeology or CRM archaeology, then you might want to stay there and violate that rule just because it's got a great program that's aligned with your goals. But if you have the ability to think ahead and you have the time and effort to say, well, I really want to go to grad school here, so I'm not going to go to undergrad here. So I'm going to go over here to my undergrad, and it's going to be pretty expensive. So maybe go to an in-state school for that, and then go to where you want to go for your graduate degree. So I don't know, but that'd be really hard to manage. I mean, I had no idea I was even going to grad school until well after I got out of my undergrad.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I would like to say about this. Really, it actually depends on the individual. In a perfect world, we would know what we're going to do, and then we would just, set up all the blocks and knock them all down. But that's never really how it ends up happening. And then also with the grad school, sometimes you don't get in. And sometimes you don't get in even at your own university, right? Because you have no way of knowing who's going to apply that year, how much money they have for graduate students, which professors accept another student. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And then finally, you're trying to choose a graduate program where there's folks that you can work with. So sometimes, if the department doesn't do the thing that you're actually interested in, and there's no one there to help you finish your research or get out of college, I mean, that's not really the best fit for you, even if it's, a prestigious place or you're getting a full ride. So there's a combination of things. So it depends on which direction you're going to go, right? So if you're an undergrad and you're planning on going on for your master's right out of undergrad, you're not going to be a field tech, you're not going to do anything, you're just going to go straight through, then, you really need to start looking at what kind of incentive you can get, if you can get funding, if you can get tuition waived and other things. And, you're going to get that at a terminal MA program where the MAs are the main course, I guess, of the whole program. And so every TA position is by someone who's going for their MA, and every, research grant, travel grant is really for the MA folks. So if you're in that kind of situation and you end up going there, an undergrad, and then you have a terminal MA thing and they actually like you and it's a good fit, then it's probably a good idea to just stick it out there if they'll accept you and you can get, tuition waiver or an MA, or you can get a TA position. If you're going for a master's at a place that has a PhD, then you're in the same place as the other PhDs. And, I watched it happen at Arizona. Essentially, you end up being the one who's paying retail for your master's, while the PhDs get tuition waivers and research stipends, and they're available to apply for these grants because they're PhD students, but then the MA students have way fewer options. So in that case, you're going for prestige, but you're also going to just get out fast. So the folks who are there, the professors that are there, people that you work with, folks that are going to help you out, that plays a bigger role because you are trying to build those connections, but you're paying retail the whole time. So you might as well just get out as fast as you can and do the kind of research that you can get and further your career, because it's pretty clear that your university's department is aiming towards these PhDs. I don't recommend that anyone just take their BA and try to go for a PhD. I don't think it's, that sound of a move. However, I have seen people who are just complete geniuses that are going to get, full ride. They're absolutely intelligent, super motivated. They just live and think and breathe graduate school. Those are the kind of people that are going to kill it no matter where they're at. And, if you're a genius and, you can get scholarships and you come to your school and you're going to get a free ride at, Harvard or UCLA or in your undergrad, just go ahead and do it. You can get research, you can get experience later. But right now is the time when everybody really wants you. And, that's the kind of person that ends up running, like the NSF or, being a UNESCO, they're just motivated all day and all night. They're in a different category. However, 99% of myself, I can speak to anyone else on the show. BA, I wasn't ready for PhD. I was not ready to go on for that. And after my MA, I was definitely ready for PhD. So you finish an MA, you've been doing CRM for a while. Yeah, you're ready for a PhD.
All right. Well, I'd like to get Heather's thoughts on this. She joined us after we started the recording, so I didn't get to introduce her. But Heather, welcome to episode 179. And what are your thoughts on going into a graduate program, but maybe seeking out a different program from the one that you first got your undergrad in? That's basically what we're talking about.
Thank you. Sorry about the late entry. I think it depends on your path. And I think that For the most part, I think it's a good idea to have two separate experiences, your undergrad and your graduate. Obviously where you go to undergraduate, and if you're ready to just go straight into your MA from there, there are going to be some incentives that are thrown at you from where you are at undergrad. Then again, there are some universities that don't want that. In fact, they don't accept you, or it's a little harder to get in if you already had an undergrad. I can think of a few places right now that they actually prefer to have students that are coming in from another program because they like to see you. I think it just depends on the department. I do think that it is good to have two different perspectives, ideally, but again, you have to see what works for you. When I was in graduate school, I was a single mom with two very small children, and I had to do what was practical for me. And I think, this obviously is a subject that I think would be good for us to talk about. It's something that's been talked about quite a bit on certain platforms, and that is, being a parent and being an archaeologist. And that is definitely a challenge. So I think you just have to look at your life and look at what is going to work best for you. And also look at scholarships and what's going to be provided you. I actually finished, it was a solid 3-year program. It was difficult to get out and actually do a good research project, do a solid thesis in anything under 3 years in the program that I was in. And I actually went through and I don't have any debt at all. Everything I did was on scholarship. So, and that was in a terminal MA program. So it is possible, but I looked at it when I was looking at universities and whether I was going to do the MA or the PhD route. And I knew that when I was looking at PhD programs, there were quite a few that said that were going to accept me, but they said that they wanted that commitment of a full PhD. They were not interested in me doing an MA and then deciding from there. They wanted that commitment. In fact, they weren't even going to give the MA partway through. You had to commit to the whole PhD program. So for me, unfortunately, I had to look at the reality of being able to be employable, and I wanted to be able to have the flexibility of moving forward right after MA, if that's what I decided to do. And so I went ahead and decided to do the MA first and then decide whether or not I was going to carry on to a PhD. And so, again, you just have to look at your life and what works best for you.
Yeah, all good points. And I think, first off, something you mentioned right at the beginning of that was, having a conversation about parents and being a parent in CRM. Go check, for anybody listening to this, head on over to the arcpodnet.com page, and you could do /CRM Arc Podcast, or just do it from the main search page. We have talked about being a parent and raising children while in archaeology. However, it's always good to have that talk again, especially with different perspectives, because you could have I feel like 20 different people talking about raising a family while being a CRM archaeologist, and you'll get 20 different perspectives on it. So, it would be great to get your perspective. Sure. It would be great to get Bill's perspective again, because now he's a professor. He's not in CRM anymore. How is that a challenge with raising his children? What is that? How is that different? How is it better? How is it worse? Stuff like that. So, but then on top of all that, going back to the grad school thing, I think also, when you're choosing a program, and I've said this a number of times, look at your long-term career goals, and you might not know what those are yet, and those are probably going to change, to be honest. But look at your long-term career goals now and say, listen, do I just see myself working for to be honest, it's probably not going to be a mom and pop in 30 years, but working for like a major CRM, engineering firm in the CRM department and leading a group of people, or working, as a PI or something like that at another firm. If that's the case, then what you do for your grad school program is probably not going to matter too much. So get out as cheap and quick as you can. I say that time and time again. If you've got money to burn and you don't care about student loans, then study something fun, because you may not be able to do that ever again. However, if you want to just spend the least amount of money and get out in the quickest way possible, then find a program that is amenable to that, and know that, maybe you're just looking for the check in the block. And I can't say that enough. I say it all the time. So
one issue I have with that is the notion that, people out of high school even, or undergrad, know exactly what they want to do. And even those people who think they know what they want to do, and until you've actually done it, and you've done it for a number of years, does it really kind of solidify in? And
Right.
I think that a lot of times you get people who kind of, I'm going to call it the tech school route. That might be a little bit of a misnomer, but basically, they're going to do what you say, where it's like they're an undergrad, they've been a field tech for a couple of seasons, short seasons, because they were going back to school, and they love it. They want, this is what they want to do. And, so they go and quickly, just knock out any old MA because that'll get them their ticket to, kind of advance up in the CRM industry. And then they go out and they do CRM for a few years. And the problem is at that point, well, one, they're kind of trapped because it's like, if they did the quick and dirty, MA got me what I want, not all doctoral programs like that. So like if they do want to go back, they might be at a certain disadvantage. The other thing is by going and doing like a larger MA sort of thing, they kind of have the opportunity to like be exposed to new ideas that they weren't exposed to as the undergrad. And maybe they're like, you know what, CRM's cool and I'm okay with it for right now. But long term, I think that something else would more align with my research interests that I didn't even know was a thing until you started digging deeper at the MA level in grad school. I guess my overall idea is that, we don't necessarily know what you want because you haven't been exposed to it yet. And the more sure and more streamlined you try to make your process at the undergrad and even the MA level, the less likely you are to be exposed to other things that you might actually find more beneficial.
The other thing I remember about my grad school, both times I went back for my master's at the University of Idaho and I went back for my PhD. Both times I pursued research that I found was interesting and things that I knew that I could actually keep working on for a long time, even after I get completely sick of the entire thesis process. And after I finished those degrees, it was those research interests, those things that I'm really interested in, that have kept me through CRM at times when I was doing projects that I thought were totally horrible. I mean, writing short blurbs for newsletters and writing blog posts and other things on stuff that I found interesting. I mean, that really kept me going when I was sitting in hotel rooms and doing projects that I found completely undesirable and not very interesting. And I actually didn't want to be there. So there is something, I agree with Stephen, something to be said about choosing a place where you can do the kind of research that you've always wanted to do, because especially in CRM, you don't always get the chance to do the research that you find interesting.
Okay, well, on that note, that somewhat sad note.
It's not a sad note, it's just a legit note.
It's a reality check. All right, well then, on that reality check, then we are going to take our first break and come back on the other side and continue our discussion that we had last time regarding a long email that Doug got. So we'll do that on the other side. Back in a second. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMARC. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode. Okay, we are back on the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 179. And as I mentioned before the break, we are going to talk about A couple extra questions that we had from the email that Doug mentioned on the last episode, the Sierra Mark Podcast, episode 178. So if you want to listen to that, go ahead. But these are basically standalone episodes because this person that emailed Doug had a lot of questions, and they're some of them work together and some of them do not. But I'm going to bring up two questions, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because they really go into some detail, and Doug's already responded to him on that. But they kind of work together as well. And so I'll mention the first one here and just the first part of it. And he says, at the moment, I'm just pulling together pieces of the puzzle. I'm not completely certain about my career goals, and that is partly because I don't have a clear idea of what a job in archaeology might look like. And the second part of this question, which I'll mention again later on, but because I think these kind of go hand in hand, he says, when I mention hands-on fieldwork, I'm referring to the work that would allow me to be physically engaged with artifacts, remains, dig sites as much as possible. He says there are a few work scenarios that I would consider perfect, putting realism aside for the moment. One or two of them would be working primarily outdoors on a project that I've invested my time into, like long-term projects. So anyway, he goes on to say a bunch of things, but I think what Stephen and I were talking before Heather and Bill got on, but we were talking about what that even means. And I think taking off on this first part, I don't have a clear idea of what a job in archaeology might look like. I'm not sure any of us have a clear idea of what a job in archaeology might look like because it's constantly changing. And I'll kick this discussion off. I'll kick this discussion off by saying, really talking about the second part of his question, saying, which everybody who is not an archaeologist, it's almost universal that they say, oh, I want to be outside and I want to work with my hands and I want to be on a dig site for basically the rest of my life, not really realizing the A, physical implications of that on your body, but B, the actual reality of that. If you're going to be a college professor, you're probably only going to be on a field site for 6 weeks out of the year, maybe longer if you're running a couple field schools, but very short period of time when looked at in the context of the entire year. And Bill can chime in on that in a minute here, but
tragic but true.
Right.
I even actually don't get to spend enough time doing lab work anymore. I kind of want to wash artifacts, but I don't even get to do that.
No. And then there's multiple facets of CRM archaeology because we all know at least a few people that have been career field techs, maybe crew chiefs, but either way, career field people, right? They're always in the field. They're traveling from job to job, basically career shovel bumps, because I wouldn't consider salaried project managers, PIs, things like that, shovel bums anymore. And I don't think anybody would, but the people who are actually traveling around consistently. And I know of at least a few people that I still follow on the social media sites that they're really they're moving around. It's what they enjoy. It's what they love. And if they can do it physically and financially and keep that lifestyle going, then more power to them. But a lot of people just naturally sort of want to, I don't know, settle down. It's in our human nature to want to settle into a location and have some security. We always hear those words, security, and they want to, I guess, tie themselves down to a location and a job, but nothing is secure in this field. I mean, absolutely nothing. And I'll bring this up one more time and then I'll let the others chime in. But there was a company here in Reno that right about now, actually, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe less, but it was at least 2 years ago. They're a pretty stable company, I would say. They had some people there that have been working there since they got out of college and, been there for 10 years plus. And all of a sudden they laid off almost their entire field staff, including people that had been there for a really long time and thought they would be there for another 10 years. It's because of the market. They had no work. They simply couldn't afford to pay anyone anymore. And they laid everybody off 2 weeks before Christmas, which from a financial standpoint is not uncommon in this field to be in Nevada, to be out of work by mid-December if you haven't planned to have any lab work or report writing or anything like that. I mean, you just can't do field work in this state in general, starting at about maybe December. There are some areas that are lower in the valleys where you can do some field work because there's no snow on the ground. But in a lot of places, it's just too high of altitude and there's snow covering the ground and you just can't do field work. So, I can't really fault the company for doing that. If they didn't have the money, they didn't have the money, but maybe they should have thought about that and found other things where, I don't know, the business could be profitable, but most companies don't do that. That's kind of a pie in the sky sort of dream. And they're a pure CRM firm, so they couldn't take their people and move them over into other departments for a little while that were able to work. Like major engineering firms, they're going to have that ability in some cases to shift people around and to shift finances around and not lose the people and the training and time they've invested in them. Whereas mom and pop CRM firms, my own included, simply couldn't afford to hire people without work and to keep them staffed without work. So that's my soapbox on this. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. Almost all the times I got laid off were either before Christmas or right after Christmas. So by the winter time,
it's a
the
hazard of the
contracts
job.
start drying up, and it's going to be months before more construction really begins. So, and like we all, and I remember actually when I knew I was going to lose my job, but after it happened a few times, you can kind of sense what's about to come down the line. I remember thinking, well, why don't they diversify? It's not as easy. It's not easy to come in with millions of dollars in some other line of your business while still maintaining the thing that actually puts food on the table. So, I go back and forth on it because I always feel like, historic preservation, landscape architecture, and just basically architecture in general and environmental engineering is where you can make boatloads because, one architect can feed like 3 archaeologists just on the overhead of that one architect's abilities or whatever. And all the companies where we did have more stability, there were a lot of architects and landscape architects and stuff, and people who could do the designing work for these construction projects, and the archaeologists were there too. So you're right, if you have those two things, but I don't know what comes first, right? Does the design work come first, then the archaeology, or do the archaeologists realize, hey, we really need some architects on here to start getting this design work? And then it ain't easy to build that your clientele's for that other design work if you're known for archaeology. It's like, well, why would I go with you? You aren't even architects. Why would I go with you? But long story short, that is tragic, and it happens every single year. As we've talked about many times, and you wrote a whole book on it, how to survive and how to get unemployment, how to save for the winter, and how we know so many other people who do other, holiday jobs. They just stop being field techs and they just teach snowboarding or work at Starbucks or something else until the snow, goes away.
Yeah.
You're at the mercy of your employer, really, if you only have one stream of income and no other skill, you can get a winter job.
And two ideas really coming off of that. One I forgot to mention, and the other one I'll talk about what you're just saying there. It's always important for people who want to maintain a field lifestyle to really come up with a solid quality side hustle that they enjoy. Not something that they have to do over the winter, like work at Starbucks. Unless you really enjoy coffee and working at Starbucks, then fantastic, go ahead. But if you want to, I feel like this career gives us a unique opportunity to explore those other things that maybe were passions in our life and see if we can monetize that, if we can save enough money to really pay most of the bills, if not all the bills, for 3 or 4 months during the winter, and then have that ability to pursue those other passions, whether they're monetizable or not. And then, maybe that can work into something. So that's something that is unique to our career, I think, and very few other careers, because then you can just pick the fieldwork back up in the spring. But then one other thing I got to mention, because a lot of people think when they're coming up to their first wintertime and their first layoff is, A, I need to do something else to make money. And B, man, if I just had my own company, I could write my own ticket. My God, how many times have I heard that? And let me tell you, it's nerve wracking. I haven't had an employee for a few years now, right? I've done 1099 contracts and things like that. But 5 years ago, I was on a NAVFAC Southwest contract with another company, and my company DigTech got and listeners, longtime listeners of the show know, they've heard me rant about this before, but they got in fact, I started the Archaeology Podcast Network while I was on one of those projects, which was totally insane. But I got 2 big projects that I'd never done, even as an employee for other companies. I'd never had projects this big before, but I had a 15,000 acre project and a 30,000 acre project back to back. And I was basically gone 10 on 4 off from Reno. One was in Southern California. The other was in Central California. And I was gone for about 9 months working on these projects, with brief trips back to home and my wife coming down to visit me. And they weren't crazy profitable either, because margins are tight because of the way these things are bid. And now that same company, that 5-year contract is over and they bid it again. And I literally got an email yesterday as we're talking saying that they won that contract again. And I almost didn't sleep last night because the anxiety of possibly getting, because these 5-year NAVFAC contracts, they like to do the big survey work right at the beginning of the contract. And then it's a bunch of piddly stuff, because I didn't have anything from these guys for the last 3 or 4 years. They just handled it, right? But my company did the field work for those big projects, and they wrote the report and handled the mapping and all that stuff. And we did the site records and the field work. And I'm expecting that to kind of come down again here within the next few weeks, maybe the next couple of months. And I'll tell you what, the anxiety of handling $20,000 every 2 weeks in payroll and being able to fund that and getting the loans to be able to do that, because I don't have that kind of money sitting in the bank, and then invoicing the company every few weeks for their share, and just the thought of doing another project. Now, that being said, I know I would be able to do it even more efficiently than we did last time, because we were pretty efficient last time, but I learned a lot of stuff doing those two projects. And my whole point with this is starting your own company is not necessarily the answer to all of your problems, because it brings with it a whole new suite of problems, a whole new suite of problems. And if you're up to the challenge, go for it. But just know that it is going to be a challenge in a very different sort of way, and sometimes not a good way right off the bat.
As far as the question of being able to make it through that time, the winters and everything, I'm lucky I live in Southern California, but it still does wane, even though I'm from Chicago, and it boggles my mind that what do you call it? A drive-through or drive-in theaters close down for the winter. I'm like, that's just the strangest concept. They close down for the winter in California. Right. There is no winter here. But, I think that, archaeology, especially as we call field bumming, and for those that maybe are listening to the podcast and aren't familiar with that term, that is said in the most kind and respectful way. It's a coined term that is a positive term. So it's not a derogatory term. But being a shovel bum definitely attracts a certain kind of person, maybe somebody with a little bit of wanderlust, or somebody who doesn't really like to be settled down, so to speak. And for those, like you said, that are doing it for the interim to get that experience and then want to settle down, that's great. For those that don't and really do enjoy that travel and a bit of uncertainty, but you still need to make money. I think one thing, if you want to stay in the CRM, is that you really have to get out of the mindset of, I only do field work. Because, when I talk to my kids, life is about, and they always roll their eyes. So I'm sure others that are listening to this will be rolling their eyes. But life is about, in my approximation, doing about 70%, and this is reality, 70% of what you don't want to do, so you can do 30% of what you do want to do. Mm-hmm. Life's about doing things you don't want to do. And so that, does carry over to the professional realm as well. And so, some things for somebody that, we even have some people that work in our company, and thankfully we have consistent work that we can keep people like that busy. But we have some that absolutely, they will go crazy if they have to be in the office more than, 12 hours or 20 hours in a week. They just don't like it at all. But you have to be willing to work on certain skill sets that are going to let you survive when you can't be in the field. And I think, a few of those is the simple, DPR, being able to fill out forms correctly, having some technical writing abilities, just being able to, just kind of putting down the record search results section. That is an art in and of itself. But if you get good at that, make you very, very valuable. Doing some lab analysis, but, sometimes lab's not always available, but writing always is. And being that jack of all trades, the person that is willing to do anything, even if you don't know, but the person says, hey, can you do this? You know what? I don't, but I'm a quick study and I'll learn how to do it. So you have to, I hear a lot of people in the field that, all they want to do is be in the field, but unfortunately that's not reality if you want to continue to pay the bills. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, along those lines, I find myself saying a lot lately is that this is work, and it's called work for a reason, and and you have that notion. It's like you look around at other people who are doing jobs. Somebody comes and is taking care of, like, making sure your internet's running, or they come and repair your furnace. It's like, are these? Is this these people's dream job? Are they sitting around? It's like, oh man, I always wanted to repair furnaces for a living. It's like, probably not, but it's probably something that they don't mind doing. They can stomach doing, and that pays the bills. right? Like that's what work is. Work is what you do to pay the bills. And, it's not necessarily, like do what you love and you never have to work a day in your life. It doesn't work like that way.
Mm-mm.
Like you're going to be out there and you're going to be doing a whole bunch of surveys and you're not going to find crap. And you're going to be standing in the rain and it's going to start to snow and you're going to be miserable and cold and tired and you've been away from home for 20 days and, whatever. And sometimes that's the job. Preferably you're not miserable the entire time, or, that might be a signal that you need to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that, the job's the job and you're doing it because you don't mind doing it. You don't mind the lifestyle, whichever lifestyle your particular position has you in. You're in the field a lot. You're in the lab a lot, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you just roll with whatever comes down the, task list to you.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to take it to break here in a second. We're going to continue this discussion on the other side. However, I will say, and maybe we can talk about this, but I think I just heard this in a movie of all places. I can't remember what movie it was, but it was a movie my wife and I were watching recently. But somebody said, this person was a cashier. I wouldn't call that a career. I call that a job, and it made me think actually that there really is a difference between a career and a job. And I feel like a career is more of a mindset. A career is more of a, I'm going to do something within this field probably for the rest of my life. I mean, things change, but I'm probably going to be doing something like, I'm doing way less field archaeology than I was 5 years ago, but I still am an archaeologist in that I'm staying in this field in other ways, right? Via this podcast, via WildNote, via doing other things. I'm still staying in this field. And that I think is a career. I think my career as an archaeologist will always be there. But if you have a job, that's the kind of thing that I don't know if that really is a career. And I think that sometimes a career can be a job and there are aspects of your career that are job-like, but I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. So, Stephen, let's take a break real quick here. I saw your hand up, and we will come back and finish this discussion on the other side. You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show. Welcome back to the CRM Arc Podcast, episode 179, and we are continuing this discussion about the emails that we've received. So, Stephen, you have an interesting perspective on jobs versus careers. Or so you think?
I didn't say it was interesting. I just said I had a comment.
Okay.
Now I have to think of something good. I've said it before on the show. I don't really think in terms of jobs. I think in terms of projects, and that's kind of a reflection of kind of the whole gig economy sort of thing, right? Like when you sign on to a company, you're given a project. And then, you work on that project. And if you're only hired for that one particular project, that's all you get. But sometimes you kept on, they hand you to another project and they, hand another project to you and so on and so forth. And that's the job, right? Mm-hmm. That you're working on all these projects. But then like you were saying with your example of where everybody got laid off 2 weeks before Christmas, it's like sometimes there are no more projects. And that's it. There goes the employment. Your employment is basically a series of projects and you go from one project to the next.
Right.
Ideally, on a comfort level, all those projects are, with one company, but, there are plenty of archaeologists who've, worked for one company for, a project and then jumped to another company for a project or they work for one company for a series of projects and then move to a different one and then move back. And then, there's a little bit of flexibility in that. Mm-hmm. And then, so in my mind, to respond to your notion of like, a career and is that the career is the long-term set of projects that you've worked on, whereas your job is a smaller set of projects or singular even. So, if you want this to be your career, that's kind of a different thing that, you can have a career in archaeology that is a multiple, that could be very different from beginning to end because you're going to be jumping from project to project to project. But in the immediacy, you have to deal with whatever this whatever the project is on your desk, because it's the one that's sitting on your desk.
I think that's an excellent point that you make as far as the differentiating the difference between, a job and a career. And, along the lines of that, the career is definitely something that you need to sit and you are actually massaging and working on yourself. And you have to think outside the box and think about how do you want to progress in that career, where the job is, like you said, a set of tasks put in front of you, and you need you need to follow those tasks. But the career is definitely something that you can't sit back. If this is something you want to be a career for you, archaeology, you need to take an active role in creating your professional persona and your professional skill set. That's not something, a career is not something that just comes to you generally. Sometimes that happens, but for the most part, it's something that you have to work really hard at developing. And so along those lines, and what we've mentioned before in this podcast and others, is that you really have to take an active role in developing yourself as a professional so that you can survive in this as a career. And it can become very frustrating. I've seen people get very frustrated because they feel like they're stuck. I see people that end up, they're monitoring all the time. And it's something that's, listen, I think this isn't what I signed up for. I wasn't excited to, in college and university to go and monitor. This is not what I had envisioned myself doing as an archaeologist. And so, but it's obviously a very valuable task, a very valuable aspect of archaeology. But if that is something that you feel that you are stuck, it's on you to start developing yourself in a way. Reach out to your employer and let them know that you're very thankful for the work, but you'd like to start pursuing other avenues if they have them, other opportunities. And I'll say one more thing, as far as developing or making sure that you have a career mindset is, I'm finding that a lot of people that are applying to our company have this concept that they're going to be working straight through with one company. And that's kind of a new concept for me. When I started, I've been lucky that I've been able to work for just a few companies, but for the most part, as a shovel bum or as a technician, you really do have to go out and be working for several different companies if you want to keep yourself active and moving. It is a juggle game, and you have to come in with that reality and realizing you can't just count on one company is going to keep you afloat for the entire season. It generally does not work that way.
The other piece I'd like to add, because these are all really good, this is all good information coming from folks who are living it, in real time. So it's not just made up. It's people who are living this life. But my career really changed when I started to visualize where I actually wanted to be. And I was working project to project, and I was, trying to move up and in the companies where I was at. But, as long as we just focus purely on the job and trying to make money and all that kind of stuff, we'll lose sight of that we have a much larger life. And I think that's probably where the tragedy comes in when folks start and then they get laid off and they're kind of like, well, this is who I am. I don't really know anything else but this. And I used to be like that as well, scrambling to get another job. But it wasn't until I started to think about, the bigger picture of what kind of stuff do I want to have? How do I want my kids to, do I want to take vacations with my kids? Do I want to provide certain things for my family? Do I want to do certain things? And then other things that I hate, what do I not want to do anymore? What do I want my life to look like? Those were all things that were beyond they couldn't necessarily be influenced by my job because they were just kind of personal goals of becoming a better individual, and working on things that I found interesting that don't have anything to do with archaeology. Because when I was in it and I was trying my hardest to become an archaeologist and keep a job in archaeology, then it was like everything. If I went on a project that was really crummy and we didn't find anything, I was sad about the fact that we didn't find anything. When my hours are cut back and I'm furloughed, or things don't go the right way, I'm really sad about the way that I don't have this and I don't have that. Well, it wasn't until I started thinking about the stuff that I control, about my thoughts and about the way I act, and little things, the clothes that I have. how much time what do I do when my kid asked me for something? I mean, those were all things that I could control in the moment that didn't have anything to do with someone else hiring me. And, that was, what kind of person do I want to be? How similar to my parents or not similar do I want to be? Is there someone that I really want to be like and start doing the kind of things that they did in their life? Are there places I want to go? Because that was those dreams and imagination of, things that are far in the future. You don't know how you're going to get them or what it'll actually look like when you get there. That aspiring towards those goals are what keep me from just only being an archaeologist and help me be a human being.
Yeah, it's something you said, Bill, really made me think back to, probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. And when I think about the primary really aspect of this question that our emailer has asked is, what does a job in archaeology look like? I think it's whatever you want it to look like, because when you're saying like you get back from a day of survey and you didn't find anything, you're sad about that. And I used to be the same way too. But then at some point, I started looking back on the things that I had done, and I never had kids in archaeology, so I don't have that to worry about. And I think that's a very different thing that you have to think about when you're thinking about your career and what you're going to do, because with your time off, you're going to go back and visit your family, or you have a family to support, and you've got to constantly be thinking about that. So that's a different thing. But when my wife and I were traveling around, shovel bumming basically, and doing archaeology, we're trying to work our way west. A project I always think about is New Mexico. I don't remember that company very fondly. They were very difficult to work for from a leadership and management standpoint. However, what I do remember, first off, it's the only company I've ever worked for where the project schedule was 9 days on, 5 days off. It's usually 10 and 4, 8 and 6 or something like that. But this was 9 and 5. So I think we worked 4 10-hour days and 5 8-hour days or some weird thing. I don't know why they did that. But anyway, on our 5 days off, we were staying in a place out near Chaco Canyon. And on our 5 days off, you're surrounded by national parks, like fantastic national parks, not to mention just Chaco Canyon, but El Moro. And we went over to the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, a bunch of different parks, and we would camp and just stay and do stuff for those 5 days off. And when people with quote normal jobs or even normal careers think back to, let's say, what do you think about 2014? And they might say, well, I closed this deal or I did this thing from a job standpoint. And say, okay, outside of your job, what do you think? Okay, well, we took this 1-2 week family vacation during my 2 weeks vacation. And part of it was to spend Christmas with 45 of my family members. And I don't remember that being too fun or something like that. I'm not saying it's always that way, but when I think back to that year, I think of all the fantastic things we got to see and do. And that was part of the job. That was like, I consider that part of the job. Part of the perks of the job is to be able to go and do and see whatever you want to do. And you can sit at home and watch TV if you want to, if that's your thing, but we're going different places. We're doing different things. And to me, that's what a career or a job in archaeology looks like, is being able to craft that lifestyle in a way that, you see fit. So I don't know.
It's such a great idea and a really good reminder, because no matter what, whether you're, field tech or in the office or, it's sometimes you lose sight of what you really loved about archaeology or what you love about archaeology, because it ends up becoming work and you attach that concept of work to your passion. And sometimes that can be very challenging. And so, for me, I think one thing is just allowing yourself to enjoy reading archaeology on almost a superficial level, not necessarily having to study it if you don't want to read. Make sure that you're part of blog or podcasts or blog posts and doing it for the fun of it also. And it's something that we lose because we end up. I've joked about how I used to love to read, but I read so much for work that I don't read for enjoyment anymore. And so, trying to focus on those things that we really love to do and what really gave us that passion for archaeology to begin with, I think will keep you going in the long run.
There's also the opposite too. For example, probably the most influential job I ever had towards becoming an archaeologist was when I was a janitor. I hated that job.
Right.
And I knew that if I was going to do anything, well, first of all, I knew that I could find a union job with benefits and retirement and savings and all that stuff, anywhere. But it could also be something like, being a janitor, right? Well, there's not really a lot of motivation or movement in that, because I wasn't really into it. And I couldn't find anything interesting about cleaning up a place that was getting dirtied every single day within seconds of me spending hours cleaning it by people who didn't even care and looked down on me for who I was. Right. So, that right there was motivation, that every single day after cleaning my whole thing and getting my stuff together, I spent, all of the rest of my shift, all of my breaks, every single thing, learning how to get a job so that I could get a job in archaeology. And it took months. And I already had a master's degree too. So it was like, I got a master's degree and I'm a janitor here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, sure, I can feed myself and have a 401k and even a pension in this position and, go off into the sunset 40 years from now after cleaning the same buildings many, many times. Or I can bust my ass and never do this ever again while still having respect for the folks who do that and go after my dream of being an archaeologist.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that's the point. You go after your dreams and do what you want to do. And Stephen said at the beginning of this discussion that, sometimes you always hear, hey, go after your passions and the money will come and things like that. We always hear that. But I think this is one of those careers where if you do it right, then you really can do that. But as Stephen also mentioned, there is real work involved. This is a job, this is work, and it's not going to be all, running through the jungle off to your plane being chased by natives. Because Indiana Jones is our best example of this job, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to green papers, I know why the guy was behind.
Yeah.
It didn't have anything to do with adventure.
Right. Well, I will say to finish out this guy's questions on this email, he did say, I think that. Let's see, what does he say at the end here? He said, I'm guessing CRM rather than academia as far as allowing him to spend as much time possible doing hands-on fieldwork. And I guess I would have to agree with that. And one final comment on that is the type of hands-on fieldwork you're going to do really needs to be taken into consideration, because if you think hands-on fieldwork is doing excavations next to a highway or 10 by 10 block excavations and then being shut down because you guys ran out of money or the client did or something like that, that's one type of fieldwork that we do in CRM. And then I think academic fieldwork, while shorter time periods, if you get to the point where you can craft that field work on your own because of your own research interests and say, listen, I want to work in XYZ place, just name the place. You have to find the school that will give you the education that allows you to do that, and then go to another place and get to the point where you can say, listen, I want to start a field school here. It's going to be real work getting that funding, getting that lined up, getting the students for it, and then going out there. But while the point of this is, while you might do less field work and less hands-on work in academia, you might get to have greater influence over what you do get to do, versus in CRM where you're really going where the money is. To be honest, you're going where the contracts are, and until you get to write those contracts, then you're still going to be limited. And even if you are writing those contracts and bidding those contracts, you're still limited on where you can go and what you can do and what's out there and what's available. Nobody's going to give you the funding to just go do what you want to do in CRM. So yeah, I don't know where we ended up on this. Go ahead.
The other unstated part, though, of that comment that we don't talk about is that the person is artistic and has an art history degree and is interested in 3D modeling. And I was just like, yeah, that's the ticket right there, my friend, because your phone or any digital SLR, you can get a quality camera and you can be creating, 3D models of landscapes, Adobe Pueblo sites, excavation units, and doing all kinds of stuff like that. And back at your hotel room with only a few dollars of software, be creating these 3D models that look totally awesome that you can put in the PDF of your company's report. You can be with the right targets and everything. You could be the person who's the photogrammetry expert of your company and still get yes, you'd be taking pictures of excavation units and other profiles and stuff, or using InDesign or Photoshop to digitize photos and create those profiles and stuff like that. But, that graphic arts aspect is a very real thing that was absolutely valuable, that if you're into that and you're really good at that, that could be the difference that keeps you going during times when you're doing projects that you don't want. So that's the other thing, that this interest, it seemed like, I want to be an archaeologist. Yeah, but you're also a 3D modeler, and This goes even beyond that. If you can figure out how to create those for your company's website using Unity and other immersive platforms, you could be the person who's creating activated books for kids. You could be the person who's making museum models for museums and stuff like that. And so it doesn't have to just be digging by the highway. This person has an aptitude and an interest in something that's invaluable and very interesting too.
I have a quick just follow on just to cap what Bill was saying, is that something really strong to consider, and this is especially true in the academy, let alone CRM, is that method specialization is what's transferable. And that's what you want to aim for. So build that skill set that you can apply wherever you happen to end up, whatever project you happen to end up, that it's like, well, I'm not actually from Alberta, but I have all these skills that I can apply to working in Alberta, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would say another really good skill to have is GIS. That's transferable, not just to archaeology, but to anything. And that is to many of the environmental disciplines. And it is so valuable. And if you have that, and you don't have to have it at a really, you don't have to have a master's level. You don't even have to have a bachelor's level. You can have a certificate or just teach yourself. Being able to do that is something that, especially for company owners, maybe the mom and pops, and I've been doing it for a long time, and GIS wasn't there in the beginning, and they don't have that skill set. It's invaluable.
Yeah, and we talk about GIS a lot on this podcast, so that's definitely something that would help you in your career. So, all right, well, we are going to end this discussion right here. Please send in your questions or comments or thoughts about any things we've talked about. You can send it to chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or find our Twitter handles and some other contact info at arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Okay, so that's it. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time. We're recording next time 2 days before Christmas for people that celebrate Christmas. So I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be entertaining. All right. We'll see you guys next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in. We'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Wow,
and no Doug, so
good. Yeah. Well, we're ruining it right now for him in his honor.
That's right. And Heather dropped right off, so no Heather either. So Heather says goodbye, though. All right.
Okay.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.